Maya's mornings began with silence. Not peaceful, not meditative, just hollow. She'd wake before her alarm, eyes wide open, not from anticipation but routine. She'd glance at the empty side of the bed. Rayhan had already left or slept on the edge, back turned, buried in unread emails or forgotten concerns. She'd grown used to the distance, but it didn't hurt any less. Breakfast was mechanical. Toast, silence. If Rayhan sat across from her, they'd exchange a few obligatory lines: bills, appointments, Zion's grades. Nothing warm, nothing real. She couldn't remember the last time he looked her in the eyes. At school, her students filled the void with noise and scribbled chaos, but they weren't hers. She taught, smiled, laughed even, but it felt like watching someone else pretend to be her. When the final bell rang, the quiet dread returned, the drive home heavier than the traffic. Zion was the only light. Her son, 14, thoughtful, always watching more than speaking. He asked if she was tired, reminded her to eat, and sometimes just sat with her in silence that didn't feel empty. But even he noticed things weren't right. He asked once gently, "Are you and Dad okay?" She said yes, of course. It was easier than explaining the ache of being unseen. That evening, Rayhan came home late again, barely muttered a hello, and locked himself in the study. Maya set dinner for 3. 2 plates remained untouched. She packed them away, the clink of utensils against porcelain louder than their conversations. Faisal visited that weekend. Rayhan invited him. As usual, they'd been friends since college. He brought his usual charm: loud jokes, expensive cologne, stories of office politics, and half-truths. Maya noticed how easily he noticed things: her new haircut, the way she folded napkins, even how tired she looked. Rayhan never noticed those things anymore. Faisal's attention felt strange at first, like a spotlight in a room she'd forgotten had light. She laughed at one of his jokes. A genuine laugh, the first in days. Zion, sitting nearby, looked up suddenly, his eyes lingering longer than usual. He didn't say anything, but Maya felt it. That gaze stayed with her into the night. Days turned to weeks. Faisal started dropping messages. Small, innocent at first. Memes. Quotes. Once, a voice note saying her voice had a calmness that lingered in his head. She didn't respond at first, but she didn't delete them either. Rayhan, buried in work, barely looked up when she walked into a room. One night, she stood in front of him in a new dress, hair styled, heart pounding. He didn't even lift his eyes from the laptop. That night, she cried in the bathroom without a sound. The mirror didn't reflect a woman anymore, just a silhouette fading into the background. Faisal came over one weekday afternoon. Rayhan was stuck at work. Zion was still in school. They had tea, talked about poetry, music, childhood. Faisal leaned in when she spoke, like her words mattered. She caught herself smiling too often. She told herself it was just the attention she missed. Nothing more. But the memory of his hand brushing hers stayed longer than she wanted to admit. That evening, Zion returned early. Maya and Faisal were laughing. Nothing physical, nothing overt. But Zion's eyes narrowed slightly, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, during dinner, he was quiet. She asked if something was wrong. He said, "You just seem different." That night, Maya sat on her bed, replaying the day. Her mind refused to settle. She wasn't in love with Faisal. She wasn't cheating, not really. But she also wasn't innocent. She knew that. It wasn't the physical boundaries that scared her. It was the emotional ones she had already crossed. She knew what she was doing, yet she kept moving forward. Not because she wanted to betray, but because for the first time in years, she felt like she existed. She walked to Zion's room, hesitated at the door, then turned away. What could she say? That she missed being seen? That his father made her feel like a roommate? That guilt was already eating her before anything even truly happened? She crawled into bed, her body next to Rayhan's, but her mind in a storm she had summoned herself. And she knew, deep down, the storm hadn't even started yet. The days became divided between reality and escape. Maya lived one version of herself under the same roof with Rayhan and Zion, performing her roles without fault, yet internally drifting further from the woman she used to be. Faisal's messages had evolved. Less casual now, more personal. He remembered details Maya herself had forgotten she'd shared. When she didn't reply, he waited patiently, not pushing but never fully retreating either. Rayhan remained locked in his digital world, barely noticing Maya's increasing silences or her shifting moods. If he did, he said nothing. Their conversations now existed only around logistics and responsibilities. They hadn't touched in months. Faisal started appearing at odd hours. Once when Rayhan was out of town, another when Maya called in sick and stayed home. He offered to bring soup. She said no. He came anyway. They sat two people pretending there was still some line between comfort and desire. Maya knew what she was doing. Each laugh, each held glance, each accidental touch was another small betrayal wrapped in justification. He listens, she told herself. He sees me. She didn't think of consequences. She thought only of how alive she felt when Faisal's voice filled the room. Zion grew more watchful. He didn't speak out, but his demeanor changed. Fewer questions, shorter answers. He stayed longer at school. Maya noticed and feared it, but she feared losing herself more. The craving to feel something other than numbness was louder than the quiet guilt gnawing at her in the dead of night. Faisal confessed one evening, in a voice low and trembling, that he thought about her constantly. That he hadn't meant for this to happen, but now that it had, he couldn't go back. Maya listened, lips pressed tight, heart in chaos. She didn't speak, but she didn't push him away either. That silence was all the permission he needed. Their first kiss wasn't planned. It happened in the middle of a long, hushed conversation about how unfair life could be. It was hesitant, broken by guilt, but once the line had been crossed, everything afterward came easier. She hated herself for not stopping it, but she hated feeling invisible even more. The next day, she woke up and looked at herself in the mirror with eyes that weren't ashamed yet, but terrified of what would come next. She deleted her messages before Rayhan woke up. She sat across from him at breakfast and tried to find any trace of the man she married in the way he stirred his coffee. There was none that it wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was hunger. For attention. For validation. For someone to say, I see you. I want you. Faisal offered that, and Maya was too starved to say no. They met again, this time without hesitation. No poetry. No long talks. Just hands, breath, and the weight of years crashing into moments. She cried after, not because of what she'd done, but because she didn't regret it. Not then. That scared her more than anything. She looked around the room like someone might be watching. She almost forgot she had a family waiting at home, that Zion's distance became more obvious. He avoided eye contact, his tone colder. Maya asked if he was okay. He shrugged, said nothing. She wanted to ask more, to pull him closer, but the hypocrisy lodged in her throat. One evening, Faisal messaged he'd come over. She hesitated, then agreed. Rayhan had called to say he'd be late again. Maya thought it would be safe, but safety was already gone the moment she let the door open for something her home couldn't contain. They didn't speak much. Their actions spoke for them. It was supposed to be brief. It was supposed to be controlled. It never was. That's when the door clicked. A sound that would slice through Maya's life like a blade. Zion walked in, his eyes wide, bag still in hand. Confusion painted across his young face like a wound too fresh to name. Maya stepped back, heart plummeting, hands shaking. Faisal froze. No words were spoken. None were needed. The truth had revealed itself in one terrible, irreversible moment. And for the first time since it all began, Maya felt what real fear tasted like, raw, bitter, and immediate.
Zion didn't speak. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes held everything Maya feared: shock, betrayal, and something deeper she couldn't name. He dropped his bag and walked past her without a word. Faisal, breath shallow, stammered something meaningless before leaving quietly. The door shut behind him, but the silence he left echoed louder than any slam. Maya stood frozen, heart pounding, shame pressing in her like a weight she couldn't lift. She knocked on Zion's door softly. No reply. She whispered his name over and over, until her voice cracked. Still nothing. She sank to the floor outside his room, waiting, hoping he'd open the door or shout or cry. But there was only silence. Rayhan came home that night, unaware of what had happened. Maya watched him from across the room, wanting to confess, to scream, to tell him everything before it unraveled. But she couldn't. Not yet. The guilt had paralyzed her. Zion avoided her completely. He stayed locked in his room, left for school early, returned late, barely touched his food. Maya tried to reach him, asking if he was okay, if he wanted to talk. He didn't even look at her. His silence wasn't out of confusion. It was punishment. And it was working. Each passing day hollowed her further. At school, she forgot things. Misplaced papers. Missed deadlines. Colleagues asked if she was unwell. She nodded, pretending exhaustion was the cause, though it was the shame eating at her every second. Zion's withdrawal infected the house. His laughter, once the background music of their home, was gone. Rayhan finally noticed. He asked if something had happened. Maya lied, said Zion was stressed about exams. Rayhan believed her. Why wouldn't he? He trusted her, but that trust shattered days later. Maya had fallen asleep on the sofa. Rayhan picked up her phone to put on charge and saw a message notification. Just a name, Faisal. His expression shifted, but he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he waited until Maya went upstairs, then unlocked the phone with her passcode, the one he'd known for years but never needed until now. The texts weren't graphic, but they didn't need to be. Screenshots, missed calls, deleted message recoveries. It was enough. He didn't wake her. He just sat in the living room alone until sunrise. The next morning, he asked Zion to pack a bag. Maya asked where they were going. Rayhan looked at her once, eyes unreadable, then turned back to his son. We'll be gone for a few days. Zion didn't ask why. He simply nodded. Maya followed them to the door, pleading for answers. Rayhan said nothing. Zion walked past her like she wasn't there. That hurt more than any slap. She stood on the porch, watching the car disappear. Her legs trembled. She fell to her knees, breath shaky, eyes unfocused. The life she had built, protected, and convinced herself still had time to heal was unraveling fast, and she had no idea how to stop it. She called Rayhan dozens of times. No response. She sent long messages, explaining, apologizing, even blaming herself entirely. Nothing. She tried Zion, hoping his love for her would outweigh his anger. Silence. That night, she wandered through the house like a stranger, touching photo frames, pillows, shirts left behind. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar. She sat in Zion's room, clutching one of his school projects, tears running down her face, not for Rayhan, not even for the affair, but for the boy who once saw her as a hero and now couldn't even look her in the eyes. 3 days later, Rayhan returned, not to talk, but to gather his belongings. Maya tried to stop him, begged him to hear her side, to let her speak. He looked at her once and said, "He saw it, Maya. I didn't need to." She froze. Her excuses, her explanations, all collapsed under that one sentence. She whispered, "Please," but it sounded weak, even to her own ears. Rayhan took his suitcase. As he left, Zion stayed in the car, head turned to the window, refusing to glance her way. That indifference broke her more than words ever could. She walked back inside, a quiet so loud it hurt. No one had yelled. No fights. No slammed doors. Just the devastating calm that follows after the damage is done. And that was her punishment. Not scandal, not exposure, but the silent, steady loss of the people who once loved her without question. Maya stopped waiting for the phone to ring. The silence had become routine now, part of her daily rhythm. She still woke early, made breakfast for one, and sat alone at the table where once 3 chairs had been filled. The home felt colder, not from weather, but from absence. Each room reminded her of what she had broken. She stopped checking Rayhan's status online, stopped refreshing her messages. The unread blue ticks had said all they needed to. Days bled into weeks, and slowly, she accepted that no apology, no explanation, no tears would undo what her actions had caused. Faisal tried calling once. She didn't answer. He tried again. She blocked him. There was no part of her that wanted to relive what they had shared. It hadn't been love. It had been weakness. And now, all it stood for was loss. She stood at the mirror sometimes, staring at the face that had once looked radiant after his visits, and now only reflected fatigue and regret. Nothing about it seemed worth the cost. Not the attention, not the affection, not the fleeting moments of excitement. She had traded everything real for something hollow. And she knew it now. At AT school, she kept her head down. The same colleagues who once praised her warmth now barely engaged. Perhaps they had heard rumors. Perhaps not. It didn't matter. Maya no longer had the energy to maintain a version of herself she didn't believe in. She went home each day to an empty house and filled the hours with chores, tasks, anything to keep the mind from spiraling. But guilt has a way of settling deep. It didn't scream anymore, it whispered, constantly. And that whisper followed her everywhere. She visited her mother once, but didn't stay long. Even there, she felt like an intruder. Her mother asked if everything was all right. Maya nodded. She didn't have the courage to say the truth aloud, saying it would only make it more permanent. She wanted to believe there was still a way back, that Zion would one day open his heart again. But deep inside, she feared she had shattered something too sacred to ever fully repair. The legal documents arrived 2 months later. Clean, efficient, cold. Rayhan didn't ask for anything. No arguments, no settlements. Just signatures. Closure in paper form. Maya signed. Her hand trembled, but not from resistance, from finality. It was over. The title was gone. Wife. Partner. The roles dissolved with a pen stroke. But the one title that hurt the most, mother, was the one she feared she had damaged beyond reclaim. Zion didn't return. Rayhan had sent him to live with his sister, a different city, a better school. Maya wasn't consulted. She wasn't invited. She only learned through a mutual relative. That night, she sat on Zion's bed, hugging one of his old jackets, surrounded by the quiet reminders of the child who used to fill the house with laughter and endless questions. She wanted to call him, but she didn't know what she'd say. "I'm sorry," felt too small for the size of the wound. She wrote a letter instead, page after page, pouring every truth she had been too afraid to say aloud. She told him she never stopped loving him, even in her worst choices, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped he'd someday understand the difference between weakness and malice. She left the letter in his drawer, untouched, unseen. She never knew if he'd read it, but writing it helped her breathe again. Months passed. Time didn't heal her, it just dulled the edges of the ache. She saw a counselor once, then never went back. The pain wasn't something she wanted analyzed. It was something she had earned. She accepted it now. This was the cost of selfishness, of not stopping when she should have, of seeing signs and walking past them anyway. Then one afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message from Zion. Just 4 words. "I got your letter." That was it. No anger. No warmth, just acknowledgement. She stared at the screen for minutes, heart racing. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even a conversation. But it was something, a thread, a beginning. She replied with a single sentence, "I'll always be here," and left it at that. She stepped outside into the fading light, the weight still heavy, but no longer crushing. She had no illusions. There would be no quick healing, no happy ending, but there would be days, and she would meet each one with quiet endurance, because that's what was left. Not a second chance at love, but a lifetime of showing that she was more than her worst mistake.